I stood frozen on the porch, the German chocolate cake slipping in my grip as the door slammed shut. The motion light glared down like a spotlight on my humiliation, illuminating the overnight bag they'd tossed at my feet. Get out. We don't have space here, you old parasite. Her words cut sharper than the click of the deadbolt. Parasite. After 21 years of mortgage payments, after burying my husband, after raising the boy who now hid behind her shoulder, I was nothing more than a burden outside my own front door. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The sun hung low over Ahwatukee, casting a golden tint over the stucco homes as Helen Granger pulled into the driveway she'd helped pay off 21 years ago. The same cracked sidewalk, the same hummingbird feeder swaying gently in the breeze. Only this time, the house felt unfamiliar. She reached across the passenger seat and grabbed the bakery box. White cardboard, corners slightly smudged with frosting. Inside, a German chocolate cake. Kyle's favorite since he was 10. Helen stepped out of the car, adjusted her purse on one shoulder and the cake box in both hands, then walked up to the front porch. The motion lights flicked on automatically, even though it was still daylight. She smiled at the memory. Kyle had installed them, back when he still asked her advice about wiring. Before her fingers reached the doorbell, the front door swung open. Diana stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly over a salmon-colored jumpsuit, lips pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. Helen blinked. Oh. Hi, sweetie. I just got the cake for... You can't come in. Helen's smile faltered. What? Diana leaned against the doorframe like it was hers to guard. We need space. You've been... hovering. And frankly, Kyle and I agreed it's just not healthy anymore. Helen glanced past her. The entryway was visible, the familiar framed photo of her and her late husband still hung by the coat hooks. A pair of Kyle's shoes lay by the stairs. Everything normal. Too normal. She tried again. Honey, it's Kyle's birthday. I thought we could have dinner together. We're not doing that, Diana interrupted. We're going out. Just the two of us. Something cold crept into Helen's chest. But I live here. Diana's expression didn't budge. Technically. But emotionally? You're like a ghost in this place. You float around making judgments, leaving your old energy everywhere. Old energy? Helen echoed, confused. We're building a new chapter. You're clinging to a version of Kyle that doesn't exist anymore. He's a man. A husband. Not your little boy. She glanced down at the bakery box. And cake won't fix that. Helen swallowed hard. I don't understand. A figure appeared behind Diana. Kyle. His face was pale, shoulders hunched. He didn't meet Helen's eyes. Kyle? She said, too softly. He looked at the floorboards. It's just temporary, Mom. We'll talk later. Something inside her twisted. You're not serious. Diana took a step forward. One manicured hand reaching out. You can pick your things up later. I've packed a few essentials. She disappeared for a moment. Helen stood there, clutching the box. The condensation from the drive had made the underside slick. She adjusted her grip, heart hammering in disbelief. Then, thunk. Diana reappeared and tossed a navy overnight bag onto the concrete. It landed with a flat, humiliating weight. Helen stared at it. Her eyes burned. That should cover you for a couple nights, Diana said, tone breezy now. We'll call when things settle down. The door began to close. Helen stepped forward. Wait. But it shut with a soft, deliberate click. Motion light still on. Cake still in hand. Bag still on the ground. No explanation. No apology. She stood frozen on the welcome mat she bought with her own money, the one that still read, "Home is where your people are," A gust of wind lifted the flap of the overnight bag, revealing a corner of her old nightgown, the soft one with the faded blue roses. Kyle had given it to her for Mother's Day, 5 years ago. The bakery box trembled in her hands. She looked at the house. Not one curtain moved. Not one window cracked. A car engine started in the garage. They were leaving. They'd timed this. As the garage door rose and Diana reversed out without a glance, Helen stepped back, the box of cake now tilting slightly. She didn't chase them, didn't yell. Her knees felt unsteady, but she held herself upright. She bent, slowly, painfully, and picked up the overnight bag with one hand, the cake with the other, and turned toward her car, not her home. The motel smelled like mildew and microwave popcorn. Helen slid the keycard into the door for the third time before the light finally blinked green. The handle wobbled. Inside, the air was stale, the carpet stiff underfoot. A single overhead bulb flickered, then settled into a dim, yellow haze. She set the bakery box on the dresser, next to a television bolted to the wall. The cake inside had shifted during the drive. Chocolate frosting now smeared the plastic window like a bad omen. She didn't bother to open it. Helen sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her own knees, still faintly trembling. Her overnight bag, that ridiculous blue thing Diana had tossed like garbage, slumped beside her. She pressed her hand to her chest and waited, as if the walls might shift and reveal a different version of the day. But all she heard was the low hum of the AC and the laughter of strangers through the paper-thin walls. No call, no text, no sun. The knock came at 8:13 p.m. Helen opened the door and blinked at the harsh hallway light. Gwen Bellamy stood there with 2 plastic bags in hand, hair pulled back into a messy clip, wearing that same faded denim jacket she'd had since the 90s. "Jesus, Helen," she muttered, stepping inside. "You look like someone canceled Christmas." Helen blinked again. "How did you know?" "Called your cell. You didn't pick up. So I called the bakery. Figured you'd stop there. And they said you'd picked up a German chocolate cake." Gwen held up the bags. "So I followed the trail of crumbs to every low-rent motel in Ahwatukee. This one smelled the least homicidal." Helen gave a weak laugh. It cracked halfway out of her mouth. Gwen set the bags down, pulled out a plastic container of chicken salad, a roll of crackers, and a bottled tea. She moved with the speed of someone who hated small talk, but loved fixing things. "I don't think I'm hungry," Helen murmured. "Tough. Eat anyway." Helen hesitated, then picked up the tea. Gwen sat down in the chair near the window, scanning the room like a crime scene. "Start talking." Helen sipped once, then again, and the words came out in slow, uneven bursts. The cake, the front door, Diana's voice, Kyle's silence, the bag. The garage door, that sick, mechanical click of being shut out from your own life. When she was done, Gwen was no longer leaning back. "They locked you out of a house you co-own?" she asked flatly. Helen looked up. "I mean, I don't know if I do, technically. The mortgage. That's not what I asked." Helen turned toward her bag and unzipped the side compartment. She pulled out a small fireproof metal box. Kyle had always teased her for keeping paper records, but she didn't trust digital files. Too easy to delete. She placed the box on the table and opened it with a key from her keyring. Inside, tax returns, old insurance policies, a copy of her marriage certificate, and a weathered manila envelope labeled Property, Southview Drive. Gwen snatched it up. Her eyes scanned fast. She pulled out a deed. The ink faint, but legible. Helen Granger and James Granger. Joint owners, with survivorship rights. "Bingo," Gwen muttered. Helen looked at her. "What does it mean?" "It means you own half that damn house," Gwen said, "and they never legally took your name off." probably didn't even bother checking the title after James passed. They just assumed if Kyle refinanced it, that made it theirs. They never asked, Helen whispered. I just thought it was easier to let them handle the paperwork. Gwen stood up abruptly. Well, they didn't handle it. Not legally. And now they've locked out the woman who owns the property. She looked down at the deed again, like it was a sword. Then she looked at Helen. You ready to stop being nice? Helen blinked, her fingers tightening slightly around the tea bottle. I don't know how to fight people I love, she said quietly. Gwen stepped forward and placed the deed in her hands. You don't need to fight them. You just need to remember what's yours. Helen stared at her name on the paper. The same name they'd tried to erase with a slammed door and a suitcase on the concrete. For the first time that night, the ache in her chest shifted. Less like grief, more like friction. Like the moment before a flame catches. 2 days later, Helen sat across from a woman with a wedding ring groove on her finger and a desk covered in paper stacks, color-coded sticky notes, and a half-empty mug labeled, Ask Me About Chain of Title. Ms. Ortega barely looked up as she motioned them to sit. You said it's an old deed? She asked, her voice even, clipped, like someone who'd seen too many families unravel over inheritance. Gwen opened the envelope and slid the folded deed across the desk with the care of someone laying down an ace. It's original. They refinanced recently, but never cleared her from title. Ms. Ortega adjusted her glasses, leaned forward, and began scanning. Her pen tapped silently against the edge of her mouse pad. Helen shifted in her seat, unsure where to look. The office smelled like toner, coffee, and lemon-scented cleaner. A copy of Arizona Property Law Handbook sat on a shelf behind Ortega, its spine fraying. James Granger, Ortega murmured, tracing the names, and Helen Granger. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. She glanced up. Your husband passed away? 7 years ago, Helen said. Her voice caught slightly, but she steadied it. Which means title passed to you, automatically. You became sole owner the day his death certificate was recorded. Helen blinked. But Kyle, he refinanced the house. Refinanced, Ortega echoed. Not purchased. That's the difference. She reached for her keyboard, tapping fast, her screen filled with property records, parcel maps, and legal line items. She scrolled, clicked, paused. Okay, she murmured. Yep, there it is. She turned the screen slightly. Helen leaned in. Her name. On the current title. Still there. Still hers. Ortega tapped again, opened another file. You've been paying property taxes under your account, Miss Granger. 7 years straight. Helen drew back. I thought I was just helping with the household expenses. Ortega shook her head. This isn't helping. You were the one getting the billing statements. These records were never updated to reflect a change of ownership because, legally, there was no change. Gwen leaned forward. And they probably didn't realize that because Kyle never filed a quit claim. They just thought refinancing meant they owned it outright. Ortega gave a faint, knowing smile. People treat refinancing like a magic wand, but title law doesn't care what they assume. It only cares what's filed. She opened a drawer and pulled out a red stamp, a notary seal, and a form with the county's watermark. She started filling it in quickly, moving like she'd done this exact dance too many times. We'll get you a certified copy of the deed and title. You're going to need it. Helen stared at her own name again. Seeing it printed there, Helen Granger, sole owner, felt less like validation and more like waking up from a long, strange sleep. She glanced over at Gwen, who gave her a half smile and the slightest nod. You okay? Gwen asked. I'm trying to be, Helen said, her voice low. You're doing better than that, Ortega replied, still stamping. I see a lot of messy fights in here. This one's clean. You're the legal owner. Period. Helen breathed in, held it, let it go. The printer in the corner whirred to life. Ortega handed her the freshly stamped document, weighty, embossed, irrefutable. Helen took it with both hands. The edges were still warm. The courtroom was smaller than Helen expected. No soaring ceilings or dramatic wooden railings like in the movies. Just pale walls, uncomfortable rows of chairs, and the faint smell of copier toner mixed with dust. Room 3B, Probate Division. Tuesday, 9:00 a.m. Helen sat at the petitioner's table, hands folded over a manila folder stuffed with everything Ortega had printed. Her name, in bold. Her tax records, neatly ordered. Photos of Kyle's 5th-grade birthday party in the backyard, of her husband James staining the fence in 2004, of Helen herself planting marigolds by the mailbox. They weren't just memories. Today, they were proof. She felt Gwen slide into the chair beside her, calm and composed in her slate-gray pantsuit. No one would have guessed she was a retired paralegal by the way she adjusted her pen and glanced toward the bench. "Judge DeMarco's sharp," Gwen whispered. "No patience for drama. She likes facts. Good thing we brought an arsenal." Helen nodded but said nothing. Her palms were clammy, despite the courtroom's aggressive air conditioning. Across the aisle, Diana sat next to Kyle with her phone face down in her lap and a performative pout on her lips. Her outfit looked curated for optics. Ivory blouse, delicate gold earrings, not a hair out of place. She leaned in and whispered something to Kyle, who gave a twitchy half-nod without meeting her eyes. Helen watched him, feeling something bitter stir inside. He looked smaller in this setting. Deflated. Almost embarrassed. Good. A bailiff called the docket number and Judge Rosalind DeMarco entered briskly. A trim woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. She adjusted her glasses, scanned the case summary, and looked up. "Petitioner, please state your case." Helen stood slowly. Her voice caught at first, the dryness in her throat betraying her nerves. But she pushed through. "My name is Helen Granger. I'm here to restore access to my property. I was removed from my home without consent, despite holding legal title. I have supporting documentation." DeMarco motioned her forward. Helen approached the bench, handed over the documents Gwen had pre-organized, and stepped back. The judge flipped through the stack. She didn't ask questions. Just kept flipping. Quiet, thorough, dangerous. Diana let out a dramatic sigh. "Your Honor, if I may, this is all just family tension. Kyle and I were trying to give his mother some space. She's been struggling emotionally. This isn't a legal crisis. It's elder drama." Helen's head snapped toward her. Judge DeMarco didn't blink. "I see no emotional crisis here, Mrs. Granger," she said. Then pointedly, "Which Mrs. Granger are you?" Diana faltered. "I'm his wife, Diana." DeMarco turned to Kyle. "Mr. Granger, did you remove your mother from the premises?" Kyle shifted in his seat. "It was Diana's idea, but I didn't stop it. I didn't think—" "Correct. You didn't," the judge said flatly, then turned back to the documents. She paused. Her gaze landed on the tax forms. 7 years of property tax records in Ms. Granger's name. And here, she held up the certified deed. Original title, joint tenancy, with survivorship. No quitclaim. No modification. She looked up again. "You refinanced, Mr. Granger?" Kyle nodded. "But never legally assumed sole ownership?" His silence was answer enough. DeMarco sighed and leaned back in her chair. "This isn't elder drama. This is a property rights violation. Based on the evidence submitted, Miss Granger retains legal ownership and full access to the premises." Diana's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her composure cracked for the first time. DeMarco continued. You'll receive a written order by end of day. The house must be vacated by Friday unless alternate arrangements are agreed to. And in writing. Helen stared straight ahead, heart thudding. Not from fear this time, but from something else. Authority. Judge DeMarco glanced over her glasses one final time. Let me be clear. Exploitation of a property co-owner, especially a senior, is not tolerated in this court. Any attempt to interfere again will be treated accordingly. She banged her gavel. Session adjourned. By Friday morning, the desert sun was already punishing the pavement. Two sheriff's cruisers idled at the curb outside 418 Southview Drive, engines low and steady. Their lights weren't flashing. Yet. But the message was clear. This was no longer Diana and Kyle Granger's house. Helen stood on the opposite side of the street, beneath the sliver of shade cast by a tall Palo Verde tree. She held a to-go coffee in one hand, sunglasses shielding her eyes from the glare, and a folded copy of the court order tucked under her arm. The deed was still in her purse. She didn't need to show it anymore. The law was already here. The front door burst open. Diana stormed out first, dragging a leopard print suitcase behind her. She wore oversized sunglasses, designer leggings, and fury-like perfume. Kyle followed, lugging a box of tangled electronics. His shirt was damp with sweat. You have no idea what you've done, Diana snapped at the deputy standing calmly beside the porch. This is our house now. You people are just enabling her delusions. The officer didn't flinch. Ma'am, you were given a court order with a 72-hour compliance window. You chose not to leave voluntarily. We've lived here for 5 years, she shrieked. You can't just hand it over to some bitter old... Kyle cut in quietly. Diana, just get the car. She turned on him. Don't you dare start folding on me now. This is your fault too. You said the refinancing was enough. Helen watched the spectacle from across the street. Silent. Still. For a moment she felt almost detached, like she was watching strangers implode in front of someone else's home. But it was her home. Again. You want to explain to our followers why we're getting kicked out? Diana shouted. Why don't you tell them you never got the title transferred? Kyle glanced toward Helen, his first real look at her in weeks, then looked away just as quickly, jaw tight. Another deputy emerged from inside, carrying 2 black garbage bags and a blender missing its lid. Last load, he called out. We'll wait 5 more minutes for anything else. After that, it's locked. Diana whipped off her sunglasses and marched to the sidewalk, where Helen now stood like a statue in the heat. For a moment, their eyes met. I hope you enjoy rattling around in that mausoleum by yourself, Diana hissed. He was my husband long before he was your little boy. Gwen's voice cut in from behind them. How's your property looking today, Helen? She stepped forward, offering Helen a fresh cup of iced coffee. Her smile was too bright, too sharp, and utterly unapologetic. Helen took it, not breaking eye contact with Diana. Peaceful, she said softly. Diana turned in a flurry of curses and stomped toward the car. Kyle trailed behind, head down, arms still full of extension cords and resentment. As they backed out of the driveway, one of the local news vans arrived, Channel 10. A young reporter hopped out with a cameraman in tow. Apparently, the property dispute turned elder rights victory had caught the media's attention. Diana paused in the middle of the street, rolled down her window, and shouted at the reporter. She kicked out her own son, just remember that. Kyle looked like he wanted to crawl through the floor of the car. The window rolled back up. The engine revved, and they were gone. The reporter turned toward Helen. Would you be willing to make a statement, ma'am? Helen looked down at her home. The marigolds long dead. The hummingbird feeder bone dry, but the bones of the place still familiar. No statement, she said. Not yet. She walked up the path slowly, Gwen at her side. The deputies nodded and stepped aside. Helen reached into her purse, pulled out her keyring, the old brass one, scratched and faded, and found the key that still fit. She slid it into the lock and turned. The click was clean. The air inside was stale, but it didn't matter. Every step into the foyer felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The silence was thick, but it was her silence. She crossed the threshold fully, paused in the center of the living room, and let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The hum of the ceiling fan in the kitchen couldn't drown out the question running loops through Helen's mind. How deep did the rot go? 3 days after Diana and Kyle left, the house was quiet again. Scrubbed, aired out, freshly vacuumed. But even with the windows open, the rooms felt like they were holding their breath. Gwen stood by the kitchen island, flipping through a manila folder Ms. Ortega had dropped off that morning. Helen leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes sharp. "It's here," Gwen said finally, tapping the last page with one red-tipped finger. "The refinance document, recorded 5 years ago." She turned the paper toward Helen. Her own name stared back at her in block letters. Helen M. Granger. But the signature underneath wasn't hers. It tried to be. The strokes were close. The cursive loop on the G nearly matched. But the M slouched. The tail on the R curled the wrong direction. And Helen had never, not once in her life, dotted her name with a tiny heart. She stared at the page. "That's not mine," she said. Gwen didn't reply. She didn't have to. Helen's fingers curled over the edge of the countertop. "Is that—" Her voice caught, then came back with steel. "Is that forgery?" "It's more than that," Gwen said. "It's mortgage fraud, and if the bank thinks you signed off on this loan, they've probably been reporting it under your credit profile." Helen turned, opened the drawer next to the fridge, and pulled out her battered checkbook register. Tucked inside was a recent bank statement she hadn't fully read. She laid it on the counter, flipping to the final page. And there it was. $9,772.89 in recent withdrawals she couldn't explain. Spa services, beauty supply stores, rental car charges, boutique purchases in Scottsdale she'd never made. A salon in Tempe listed 5 times in 1 month. Gwen leaned closer, whistling under her breath. Guess Diana wasn't paying for all those blowouts and contour kits with her influencer sponsorships. Helen said nothing. She walked to the hall closet, pulled out the last of the boxes Diana had hastily packed and left behind. It still smelled like dry shampoo and peppermint body spray. She opened it. At the top, a canvas bag marked "Content Planning." Inside, envelopes, receipts, folders. Gwen moved to the table, spreading them out like puzzle pieces. One pink invoice caught Helen's eye. Glow House Med Spa, $3,025. Full facial rejuvenation plus VIP skincare package. Beside it, a luxury car lease agreement. 3-year term. Monthly payment, $794.40. "I think she used my name for more than the house," Helen whispered. Gwen picked up the lease, eyes narrowing. "If she used any of your info here, social, account numbers, anything tied to your credit, she's opened herself up to federal-level charges." Helen suddenly felt her knees soften. She eased into a kitchen chair. "I thought I was losing it," she said quietly. "When bills started looking off, when I couldn't remember if I'd spent that much, or if I was just aging." "You weren't aging," Gwen said. "You were being robbed." Helen looked up. "What about Kyle? What did he know?" As if summoned, her phone buzzed on the table. Text from Kyle. "I didn't know what she was doing. I swear. Please don't press charges. Let's talk?" Helen stared at the screen. "Coward," she murmured, then locked the phone and pushed it aside. Gwen stood and reached into her tote. "There's someone I want you to call," she said, handing Helen a card. "He's a fraud investigator. Works with the Arizona Division of Aging. knows his way around forged signatures, unauthorized transactions, all of it. Helen stared down at the card. Eli Navarro, CFE. Elder Financial Exploitation Task Force. The name felt heavy in her palm. Gwen met her eyes. We got your house back. Now we go after your name. Helen had never been the type of person to trend, but there she was, on the homepage of the Phoenix Sentinel, beneath a headline she hadn't asked for. Son evicts elderly mother, but she owns the house. The photo was worse, taken mid-sentence during her brief, uncomfortable interview with Channel 10. Strands of gray hair loose around her face. She looked tired, raw, real. And apparently, that was what people needed to see. Gwen was the one who sent her the article, texting only, "You might want to turn off your notifications." Helen sat at the dining table, sipping lukewarm tea and scrolling through a stream of headlines and comments. Justice for Helen was trending on local Twitter. A woman in Flagstaff had started a GoFundMe called Help Helen Reclaim Her Life. Within 12 hours, it had over $7,000. Gwen appeared in the doorway, holding 2 envelopes. Mail's here, one's from Navarro, others a printout from your new fan club. Helen raised an eyebrow. Fan club? Gwen tossed the papers on the table. You're internet royalty now. There's a whole Reddit thread analyzing Diana's fake signature. Helen blinked. You're joking. I wish I were. She opened the envelope from Eli Navarro, 4 crisp pages stapled and highlighted. In bold type at the top, cleared, financial liability, fraudulent charges reassigned. Helen scanned the breakdown. Credit bureaus notified. Collections reversed. Credit score re-indexed. Her name, officially disentangled from Diana's web of deceit. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders sagged in something like relief. Then Gwen pulled up her phone and turned the screen toward her. Look at this, she said. It was a post from Diana's Instagram account. Her tone in the caption was falsely breezy, punctuated with broken hearts and hashtags. When family turns on you for clout, and the system sides with bitterness, we're starting over. Again. Just the 2 of us. No judgment, just healing. New chapter. They don't understand. Helen stared at it, silent. The image showed Diana sitting on the floor of what looked like a rental apartment back against the wall, surrounded by cardboard boxes. She had a tissue in her hand and just enough mascara smudged to imply tears. In the comments, someone replied, "Didn't you steal from your email, though?" Another, "You defrauded a 66-year-old woman and called it healing?" And then, "Girl, you signed with a heart. LMAO. Jail time, manifesting." Helen handed the phone back without saying anything. Gwen grinned. It's not court, but it's something. Later that day, a young reporter from KJZZ Public Radio arrived to do a quiet follow-up piece. Helen agreed reluctantly, as long as they didn't use her photo again. They sat on the front porch. A fresh pot of marigolds bloomed behind them. Helen wore her gardening gloves through the entire interview. When asked what she'd say to other women her age going through something similar, she replied simply, "Keep the paperwork, keep your name, and don't assume they're protecting you just because they share your last one." And when the reporter asked if she had a message for her son, Helen looked out across the yard. The wind moved the chimes by the eaves. Her voice was low, but clear. They forgot whose name was on the mortgage. The next morning, her mailbox was stuffed. Not with bills or final notices, but letters. Some handwritten, some typed. A woman in Tucson wrote that her daughter had done the same thing, forced her into a temporary move that became permanent. Another woman, retired Navy, offered to pay off the rest of Helen's legal fees. A third sent a bouquet of sunflowers with no note at all. Helen placed them in a vase by the front window. The house didn't feel like a battle zone anymore. It felt like it belonged to someone. Her. Diana's profile picture vanished sometime around midnight. By morning, it had been replaced with a low-res placeholder, the gray silhouette of a head and shoulders, and a line of italic text where her bio used to be. Page under review for terms of service violations. Gwen was the one who spotted it first, gleefully reading aloud from her tablet while they sat on Helen's porch with coffee and biscuits. She lost her affiliate links, Gwen said, smirking behind her cup. Clean sweep, hair vitamins, collagen powders, those sketchy LED face masks, all deactivated. Helen didn't answer right away. She was staring into her cup, watching the swirl of steam. She'll rebuild it, Helen said finally. People like her always find another angle. Gwen shrugged. Maybe. But it's hard to bounce back when your personal brand is built on perfection, and the internet finds out you forged a mortgage. Helen said nothing. The wind moved the marigolds in their pots. By midweek, a handful of Helen's neighbors had dropped off cards. Some brought pie. Others just stood awkwardly in the doorway and offered soft apologies. I never knew what was happening, one whispered. I thought maybe you'd move to be closer to family. Helen would smile, thank them, close the door gently. But inside, the ache still moved quietly beneath the surface. The betrayal had been loud, the vindication, louder. But what lingered was quieter, grief in a lower register. Still, the silence was hers now. On Thursday morning, Gwen tapped her phone and slid it toward Helen across the table. You should post something. Helen raised an eyebrow. Post what? I don't know. Something simple. Classy. You've earned it. Helen hesitated. She wasn't a social media person. Never had been. Her Facebook account was mostly birthday reminders and old photos from 2011. But then Gwen showed her a filtered video Diana had just posted from a new burner account. A poorly lit rant from what looked like a borrowed apartment. They left me. Both of them. I had no support. Not even Kyle. No one protected me. This wasn't about money. This was about control. She never liked me from day one. She wanted to humiliate me. Helen didn't need to watch the rest. She picked up her phone, walked out to the porch, stood in front of the marigolds, and took one picture. She didn't smile big, just enough to say, I'm still standing. Then she uploaded it, captioned it. The Parasite still owns the property. Nothing more, no hashtags, no flair. The comments came fast. Queen behavior. You deserve every inch of that porch. I showed this to my mom and she's crying in the kitchen. Not the Parasite reclaiming the hive. Justice tastes like coffee and marigolds. Helen turned her phone over and placed it face down on the kitchen table. For once, she didn't need to read the noise. She just needed to know it was out there. Across town, Diana slammed her laptop shut. Her email was a wasteland of cancellation notices, brand partnerships voided, sponsorship payments reversed, content flagged for deceptive practices. She reached for her phone, but Kyle's number now sent her straight to voicemail. He'd left 3 days ago, according to the rumpled blanket and missing chargers. She hadn't seen him since. And now, when she tried texting him, the message hung there, unsent. Delivery failed. Her face hardened. She opened TikTok, started to film another healing update. Tear-streaked, filtered, shaky voice. But just as she pressed record, a comment on Helen's post popped up in her notifications. It's not abandonment if you pushed everyone away. She stopped, deleted the draft, threw the phone across the couch. The silence that followed wasn't empowering. It was suffocating. Helen rinsed her coffee mug and looked out the kitchen window. The porch light had just flicked on, automatically, like always. This time, though, she was the only one coming home. Helen sat across from Eli Navarro in the glass-walled conference room at the Legal Aid Center. His laptop glowed between them, displaying a side-by-side comparison of 2 signatures. Yours, he said, tapping the left. And the forged one, Same name, different pen pressure, different stroke consistency. And here's the digital metadata from the refinance documents. He clicked again. Helen watched as a screen loaded, revealing a forensic audit trail of the e-signature platform Diana had used: IP address, timestamp, browser data, even device ID. Navarro leaned back in his chair. This login came from a tablet connected to your home Wi-Fi. Guess whose user profile it was under? He didn't need to say it. Helen exhaled slowly. Kyle. Navarro nodded. We're recommending formal charges to the county attorney: document fraud, wire fraud, and unauthorized use of identifying information. Diana's in the system too, but Kyle's name is on every one of the forged e-signatures. Helen felt it, like a thread snapping inside her chest. She closed her eyes for a beat. She'd wanted truth. She hadn't prepared for the weight of it. He knew. She said softly. All this time. Navarro closed the file. You've been more than patient, Ms. Granger, but this is beyond family. This is felony territory. Helen nodded. Do what you need to do. News broke by evening. Local outlets led with, son of elderly homeowner faces fraud charges in title dispute. Then the follow-up started rolling in. Digital evidence connects both spouses to forged mortgage refi. From hashtags to handcuffs? Influencer tied to elder financial fraud case. Gwen's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She had a press list now, something she swore she'd never need again after retirement. By Friday morning, she'd scheduled 3 interviews and had 2 reporters confirmed to cover the upcoming hearing. This is what it looks like when public pressure works, she told Helen over coffee. They don't get to squirm out of this. Not this time. Helen, dressed in soft gray slacks and a pressed blouse, looked out the window as the street filled with quiet again. The house didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like an anchor. Will it help? She asked. All the coverage? Gwen paused. Not with grief, but with court? It keeps people honest. Meanwhile, Diana was panicking. She burst into the office of a junior public relations consultant she found online and dumped a folder of documents on the desk. I need a statement, something strong, strategic. The consultant flipped through the headlines and shook her head. Your best move is to lay low, she said. Public denial will backfire. You're already tagged in a federal elder fraud watch list. Diana blinked. That's not fair. I didn't sign anything. Kyle did. I didn't know. Ma'am, the consultant said gently. You filmed multiple TikToks from the same room the documents were logged from. The metadata's public. Your healing journey was live-streamed from the crime scene. Diana stood abruptly. Then I'll blame him. Say I was manipulated. People already saw you throw him under the bus in that podcast interview last week. Diana's expression shifted from panic to calculation. Fine. Let them think I was emotional. It'll make me look vulnerable. But even she didn't believe her own spin anymore. Back at Helen's home, her lawyer sat at the dining table, sliding a draft of a civil complaint across the wood surface. You've got options, the attorney said. We can go after damages, restitution for everything they stole. Pain and suffering if we want to press it. Helen looked over the document. They'll say they have nothing left. The lawyer gave a tight smile. That's what liens are for. Helen didn't smile back. Make it count. She signed. Gwen stood beside her on the courthouse steps the following Monday, reporters scattered in clusters, cameras angled up, pens clicking in anxious hands. Helen wore the same blouse she'd worn to her husband's funeral: navy blue, modest collar, clean lines. Her hair was up, her eyes were steady. One reporter stepped forward. Ms. Granger, do you have a comment for the public? Helen nodded once. Just one, she said. Then she turned to Gwen, leaned in, and whispered, Let's bury them in the truth. The courtroom felt colder this time, not physically, but in tone, cleaner, sharper. This wasn't a hearing about shared space or emotional rights. This was legal termination. Helen stood at the petitioner's table once again, her fingers resting on the newly filed motion. Petition to establish exclusive ownership due to fraudulent conduct and elder abuse. Across the aisle, Diana sat in wrinkled linen slacks, hair pulled back too tightly, makeup slightly smudged around the edges, like it had been applied in a car mirror. Kyle was absent. A different judge presided this time, Judge Merrick, known for being methodical, detached, and painfully thorough. Exactly what Gwen had hoped for. Helen's attorney stood, voice calm and deliberate. Your Honor, we are requesting the court award our client, Helen Granger, sole ownership of the residence at 418 Southview Drive. Grounds include documented financial abuse, forgery, and fraudulent refinancing executed by the respondent and her spouse. Merrick barely raised an eyebrow. Continue. The lawyer slid exhibits forward. Navarro's forensic report, screenshots of Diana's social media posts, a copy of the forged refinance application, and bank statements reflecting unauthorized withdrawals. Then came the audio clip. A recording, discreetly saved by Navarro, from a voicemail Kyle left on Helen's phone 2 weeks earlier, now admitted as evidence. I didn't want to do it. Diana said we'd lose everything if we didn't get the money. I didn't think you'd ever find out. The courtroom was silent as the audio ended. Helen stared ahead. Diana fidgeted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs. Then she stood. Your Honor, I had no idea Kyle was doing any of that. I wasn't involved in the paperwork. I'm not on the loan. I was just... She looked down, searching for vulnerability. I was just trying to keep our family afloat, and now I'm being dragged into something I didn't even understand. Helen's lawyer didn't interrupt. He let Diana talk. Judge Merrick nodded slowly. Are you currently employed, Mrs. Granger? Diana blinked. I'm between engagements. My income was primarily derived from affiliate marketing and influencer partnerships, Merrick said, reading from the file. Most of which are now dissolved. Diana's lip curled. Temporarily. And your spouse? The judge asked. I don't know where Kyle is right now. It slipped out too fast. She caught herself and added, he's staying with a friend. Merrick returned to the file. All evidence submitted supports the petitioner's claims. The home in question was never legally removed from her name. The refinancing was executed under fraudulent conditions. The court finds no legal basis for continued shared ownership. Diana opened her mouth. Merrick raised one hand. Furthermore, the court recognizes the financial and emotional damage caused by the respondents. Exclusive ownership is hereby awarded to Helen Granger. The gavel struck. Helen didn't move. Not at first. She had imagined this moment, fantasized about it during sleepless nights, visualized it in Navarro's office, even whispered it into her coffee some mornings. But now that it had arrived, it felt still. Not triumphant, just final. Diana stood abruptly. This system is rigged, she shouted. You're all just cogs for bitter old people who can't let go of the past. Merrick didn't respond. He had already moved on to the next case. Outside the courthouse, Gwen handed Helen her sunglasses. That, she said, adjusting the folder under her arm, was rigged in favor of law. Helen gave the faintest nod. They didn't speak again until they reached the front door of Southview Drive. Helen knelt down at the base of the porch, slowly, carefully, and reached beneath the hydrangea bush to retrieve a small screwdriver wrapped in a Ziploc bag. She handed it to Gwen without a word. Together, they walked up the steps. The old brass nameplate beside the door still read, "The Grangers." Gwen unscrewed it, one slow turn at a time. Helen pulled a small box from her tote, New, wrapped in soft cloth. She unwrapped it and held it for a beat, then pressed it to the wood, right where the old one had been. The new plaque gleamed. H.M. Granger, homeowner. The email came at 2:11 p.m. Helen had just finished sweeping the porch when Gwen called out from the living room. Check your inbox. Subject line: Notice of account closure. Helen wiped her hands on her jeans and sat down at the kitchen counter. She opened her laptop and clicked. The message was from the Brightwell Collective, a digital branding agency she didn't recognize. But Diana certainly had. Dear Ms. Granger, we are writing to inform you that your affiliate contract with the Brightwell Collective has been permanently terminated due to violations of our ethics policy and brand protection clause. This decision is final and non-negotiable. Wishing you well on your personal journey. Brightwell Legal and Risk Compliance Team. Attached was a list of over a dozen canceled promotional accounts and influencer payment reversals. Helen read it twice, then slid the laptop toward Gwen. She's officially untouchable, Gwen said. Digitally, at least. 3 days later, a letter arrived from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. Inside, a formal charge summary for Kyle Thomas Granger, now facing 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of forgery of legal documents, and 1 count of unauthorized use of personally identifying information. There was no drama to it, no headlines, just ink and weight and inevitability. Helen set the paper down. Her throat was tight, but dry. The ache that had once gripped her like a fist now felt looser, dull, but manageable. That same afternoon, another envelope arrived. Cream-colored, hand-addressed, no return label. Inside, a folded sheet of linen stationery, a single paragraph, and a name scrawled at the bottom. Mom, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what we did. I should have spoken up sooner. I was weak. I let it happen. I hope someday you'll let me explain. Helen read it once, then folded it back up. Placed it in a drawer beside her father's pocket watch and the deed to the house, things that had survived. Gwen didn't ask about the letter. Let's talk grants, Gwen said the next morning, dropping a thick folder onto Helen's kitchen table. What kind? Helen asked, sipping her tea. Restoration. You've got a pre-1980s structure with intact historical elements, original tile, arches, that old oak in the front yard. It qualifies. I'm not restoring anything, Helen said, cautious. Yet, Gwen replied. But if you do, this could cover roofing, paint, insulation. It's not charity. It's equity. Helen looked out the window at the cracked stucco near the garage. She didn't need flash or modern upgrades, but maybe a new porch light. Okay, she said. Let's try. That month, Valley Life magazine ran a feature story titled The Woman Who Took Her House Back. There was no dramatic headline, just a soft, dignified portrait of Helen standing under the old Palo Verde tree, arms crossed, marigolds blooming behind her. The story was simple. Her husband had passed. Her son and daughter-in-law had pushed her out. She proved they couldn't. The final quote read, I don't believe in revenge, Helen said. But I believe in setting things right, especially when someone counts on you to stay silent. When Diana read the article, she threw her tablet across the motel room wall. She had tried submitting her own essay, a rebuttal titled The Cost of Control, My Side of the Story. 3 outlets rejected it. The 4th never responded. Even her last remaining podcast contact had gone silent. No reposts, no comments, no brand partnerships. The silence now wasn't suffocating. It was erasure. Helen closed the magazine and set it gently in the drawer beside Kyle's letter. Closure? Gwen asked from the doorway. Helen shook her head. Continuation. She stood, stretched her arms and looked around the living room. It felt fuller now. Lighter. more hers than ever. Helen stood behind the podium, palms resting gently on either side of the mic. The room was full, though quiet. That attentive kind of silence, where people don't shuffle or cough or check their phones. Behind her, a screen projected her name in elegant serif type, Helen Granger. Guest speaker, Arizona Senior Legal Empowerment Conference. She cleared her throat. A single camera light blinked red in the back. I never imagined I'd be up here, she began. Honestly, I never imagined I'd need to be. Her voice was steady, low but unshaken. I raised one child, I paid my taxes, I took care of my husband while he was sick. I contributed to a household, helped put down roots, and did everything I was taught would earn me security later in life. She paused. Let it sit. And then one day I came home with a birthday cake and was told I didn't live there anymore. A few audible gasps. A woman in the third row tilted her head, blinking fast. Helen continued. They assumed I'd walk away quietly, that I wouldn't know the laws, that I'd be too old, too tired, too polite to fight. She took a breath. But I remembered something my mother once said. You don't have to be loud to be right. You just have to be right loud enough for people to hear it. Scattered laughter. And now I'm saying it for the ones who can't. When she finished, the room erupted. People rose to their feet. Some clapped. Some whistled. Others just wiped their eyes and nodded. Gwen stood near the back wall, arms crossed proudly. Helen stepped down from the stage, not smiling, but solid, rooted. That afternoon, 2 board members from the Arizona Legal Aid Foundation for Seniors approached her during lunch. Ms. Granger, one said, we'd be honored if you'd consider joining our board. You're exactly the voice we need. Helen blinked, genuinely surprised. I'm not a lawyer. I've never done anything like that. The woman smiled. You've lived it, and you know how to speak. That matters more than a law degree sometimes. Helen looked over at Gwen, who raised her glass of lemonade in silent approval. Helen turned back. Then yes, I'd be honored. 2 weeks later, Gwen launched her own project. Lock the Door, Know the Deed. A weekly elder property protection workshop at the local library. The first session drew 9 people. The second, 23. By the third, they had to reserve a bigger room. I'm not letting one more woman get walked out of her own house without knowing where the damn title lives, Gwen said, as she hauled her folding posters out of the trunk. Call it revenge. I call it preparation. Letters began arriving again. Not hate mail, not threats, thank yous. A woman from Ohio, a retired bus driver from Utah, a single father from California. People who saw Helen's story online and felt seen for the first time in years. Helen read them at night in her armchair, glasses low on her nose, marigolds swaying just beyond the window. She kept them in a box beside her chair. The same place Kyle's letter stayed, still unopened. Diana, meanwhile, filed a lawsuit. Defamation, emotional damages, intentional humiliation via public platforms. It didn't last 72 hours. The court tossed it out with prejudice. The language in the dismissal was scathing. No factual foundation, no demonstrable harm, and no legal merit. The plaintiff's public statements contradict her own claims of reputational damage. In other words, you did this to yourself. Her lawyer dropped her the next morning. Kyle's Instagram vanished. No announcement. No goodbye post. Just gone. Friends said he'd moved to Flagstaff. Others said he'd changed his last name. Helen didn't investigate. She didn't need to. One morning, Helen opened her front door and found a folded note tucked beneath the doormat. Typed, anonymous. Thank you for speaking up. I haven't yet. But I will. Soon. No signature. She smiled softly and folded it into her jacket pocket. It started with a yellowing folder in a box no one had touched in years. Helen was cleaning out the garage, the final phase of what Gwen had called emotional dusting. Old holiday decor, empty planters, a curling photo of Kyle in middle school stuck behind a paint tray, then a battered file marked in James's handwriting, Las Serenas Holdings, 1997, do not toss. Helen sat on the step, cracked the brittle tab open, and unfolded a stack of paper that still smelled faintly of cedar. Inside, tax forms, notarized documents, and a single slip of stock transfer confirmation. The name printed beneath the header, Helen M. Granger, 12.6% ownership, parcel 1187, LS, Las Serenas Development Tract. She squinted. At first, it meant nothing. Just another dusty piece of the past she'd assumed was settled. Then she texted Gwen a photo. Gwen texted back in all caps, "Call me right now." 2 hours later, they were sitting in Gwen's car parked outside the Maricopa assessor's office. "It's land, Helen," Gwen said, nearly breathless. "Lake-adjacent land. Prime retirement development zone. They never built it in the 90s. But guess what? They're building it now." Helen frowned. "It's just some parcel James picked up when we were young. He used to buy those little speculative lots like they were baseball cards." "Well, this one matured," Gwen said, opening her laptop. "Last year, Las Serenas Holdings was acquired by a real estate investment trust out of Sedona. They've been buying out minority stakeholders in cash." Helen blinked. "And what would my part be worth?" Gwen turned the screen toward her. 1,237,850 clocker. Tentative buyout offer. Helen didn't speak. Not for a full minute. Then, softly, "And I almost let them toss me out over birthday cake and electric bills." Gwen smiled slowly. "Not anymore." The liquidation took a few weeks. Navarro vetted every document. Gwen pushed the paperwork. Helen signed everything with clean, slow care. No hearts over any letter. The wire cleared on a Tuesday. Helen didn't throw a party. She didn't go on a cruise. She just sat on her porch, drinking iced hibiscus tea while Gwen read off Zillow listings with her feet up on a cooler. "I found one," Gwen said. "Lakefront, gated, single story, no stairs. Community pool with a book club full of people who all hate HOA meetings." Helen raised an eyebrow. "Why are you trying to get rid of me?" "I'm not," Gwen said. "I'm trying to give you a choice." The house was small, but elegant, nestled between cottonwoods, the water visible from the back patio. It had soft sage walls, a sunroom, and an HOA that prided itself on respecting quiet hours. Helen closed her eyes for a moment as they stood in the living room during the final walkthrough. James would have loved the kitchen. Kyle would have called it boring. Diana would have scoffed at the countertops. Perfect. She paid cash. No mortgage, no cosigner, no co-owner. Just one name on the deed. Again. 3 days later, the transaction posted in the county register and appeared in the real estate highlights column of the Arizona Living section, nestled between a bridal venue expansion and a new food co-op. Granger purchases Lakeview Retreat in Ocotillo Shores. Diana saw it while waiting at a laundromat, flipping through a community paper someone had left behind. Her eyes locked on the surname. Then the photo. A small house with a white door and an arched entryway wrapped in bougainvillea. She read it twice. Her jaw clenched. Helen never called anyone about the purchase. Not Gwen, not the lawyer, not even the neighbors she'd grown to like again. She just showed up the following Saturday with a small box of dishes and the marigold seeds she'd dried herself. The HOA welcome rep, a sprightly woman named Irene with orthopedic sandals and a terrifying memory for names, handed her a folder of community guidelines and said, "You'll like it here. We mind our business and tend our plants." Helen smiled. "Sounds perfect." That night, as she sat on the patio overlooking the lake, Lights from the dock flickering, wind brushing her collarbone. She opened her phone. She scrolled past Diana's dead links, past Kyle's vanished profile. She opened her email, clicked compose, and wrote, simply, I kept the house. And now I have another one. You were wrong about me. She didn't hit send, but she saved it to drafts. Just in case. The rental was a squat adobe duplex off 7th Avenue, faded stucco, cracked sidewalk, a chain-link fence someone had tried to make charming by weaving plastic vines through the gaps. Helen had driven by once before, hadn't stopped. She stopped now, parked down the street, engine off. Windows down. The air smelled like hot dust and fried oil from the corner taco truck. Inside her tote sat a single manila envelope. Contents: a certified copy of the deed transfer, confirmation of ownership under her newly formed LLC, and a 30-day notice to vacate. Already notarized, already served. It wasn't revenge. It was real estate. 2 weeks earlier, Gwen had found the lead. A paper trail buried in an old county transfer file. The duplex had originally been purchased by James Granger, before Helen ever knew about it. Before the marriage. Diana and Kyle had moved into it after their influencer bubble popped, claimed it was a friend's, paid rent sporadically, let the garden die. But the title? Still linked to a holding trust James never dissolved. And now, legally, to Helen. The process was dull, methodical. Gwen called it the slow burn paperwork flex. Helen called it closure. She didn't even deliver the notice herself. A uniformed process server had handed it off 3 days ago, and now Diana was on the porch, arms crossed, pacing while yelling into her phone. No, I don't have legal counsel. I'm not paying someone $300 an hour to tell me I'm screwed. Just call me when you find a loophole, okay? She hung up and flung the phone onto a plastic lawn chair, then kicked a dead planter so hard the dirt burst sideways. Kyle appeared in the doorway, gray hoodie, eyes hollow. We can't afford to move, he said softly. She must know that. Diana spun. She's doing this because of that stupid article. You think she even wants this place? It's about ego. She owns it now. Diana barked a laugh. She owns everything now. Kyle looked down. Neither of them saw the car parked down the street. Inside it, Helen adjusted the AC and watched. No joy, no venom, just stillness. There were no reporters, no cameras, no judge. Just the slow exhale of a debt being cleared. Not financial, but spiritual. The one they'd tried to bury her under. Later that evening, Gwen found Helen sitting on the edge of the dock at Ocotillo Shores, dangling her sandals from one hand. She handed her a paper coffee cup. Didn't think you'd go, Gwen said, but I knew you'd drive by. Helen nodded once. I didn't go to gloat. I know. They sat in silence, watching the water ripple under the glow of the dock lights. Then Gwen grinned. You just monopolied them, Helen snorted. What? You know. Full circle. They stole your house, so you bought theirs. Property swap? Redemption edition? I'm not keeping it, Helen said. She reached into her bag and pulled out the keys, held them out. Donate it, she said. There's a women's shelter 2 blocks away, Ruth's place. I called the director this morning. They need transitional housing. Said they'd take it if it had plumbing and 4 walls. Gwen stared at her. You're serious? Helen nodded. No rent, just maintenance. Let it serve someone who didn't steal their shot. You know Diana will hear about this. She already has. Across town, Diana refreshed the county recorder's website for the 5th time in an hour. The owner field now read, Ocotillo Haven Investments, LLC, Trustee, Helen M. Granger. Her phone buzzed, an email from her old podcast sponsor. Subject, possible second chance interview? Status, declined. Reason, Public sentiment has shifted. We'll pass. She threw the phone against the couch cushions. No crack, no bounce, just silence. That night, Helen walked barefoot across her kitchen, the tile cool against her skin. She placed the house keys inside a small envelope, wrote one line on the front. Let this one open safer doors. She left it on the counter for Gwen to collect in the morning. Outside, the lake shimmered under a moon just shy of full. Helen slid the sliding door open and stepped out onto the patio, wrapped in nothing but stillness and her own breath. A life returned, and hers to give away. This time, the paper lanterns went up at noon. They swayed gently from the string lights Gwen had artfully zigzagged across the backyard, white bulbs catching in the low branches of the Palo Verde, casting soft halos across the garden. Helen stood on the patio, hands on her hips, watching the final setup like a foreman with a checklist. The marigolds were blooming. So were the people. Neighbors she'd once only waved to from a distance now drifted into her yard with dishes and stories. There were kids chasing each other between lawn chairs, an elderly couple dancing slowly on the brick path, and a pair of city staffers from the Department of Aging trying not to sweat through their polos. Helen wore linen, loose and clean, hair pulled back with a clip. Her only accessory, the silver hummingbird pin James had given her on her 40th birthday. Now she was 67, still here, still standing. And for the first time in years, standing in her house not as someone defending it, but as someone welcoming others in. Gwen clinked her plastic cup with a spoon. Speech, someone yelled from the folding table. Toast, another corrected. Helen tried to wave it off. Gwen elbowed her. Don't make me quote you to yourself, she muttered. Helen sighed, laughed, and stepped forward. Gwen raised her cup. To the woman who proved that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, that resilience doesn't have to shout, that justice can wear marigolds and still walk like steel. Applause rippled. Helen's throat tightened, but she smiled. Someone handed her a small envelope. No return address. Inside was a card printed with the seal of the Arizona State Council on Elder Advocacy. In gold letters, Certificate of Civic Recognition for Outstanding Individual Action in Defense of Elder Rights. She stared at it, not because it shocked her, but because it didn't. The evening settled into warmth and music, lemon bars and tamales, lawn chairs and slow-dancing shadows. And then Helen stepped to the front porch. The camera crew from Channel 10 turned their lens toward her, but kept their distance, like she'd asked. She ran her hand over the wood paneling by the front door. Gwen joined her, carrying a small covered plaque. You sure? Gwen asked, eyes gleaming. Helen nodded. It's time. With a soft tug, she pulled off the cloth. Underneath, in clean brass script, Granger House, protected by wisdom. The small crowd clapped, some quietly, some with emotion too big to hide. Helen traced the edge of the plaque with her thumb, grounding herself in the moment. I didn't buy this house twice, she said softly. I just never stopped owning it. The story ran that night, just a minute-long feel-good clip in the local news, but it traveled. Old friends from out of state emailed her. A church group in New Mexico invited her to speak. Someone from a senior housing network in Oregon asked if she'd consult on a new resident rights initiative. She declined most of it, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't need another platform. She had this one, the one she built before anyone tried to take it, the one she kept. She wandered inside as the last of the guests trickled out. Gwen was wrapping leftover potato salad. Someone had left a bouquet of lilacs on the kitchen table. No note, just scent. No sign of Kyle, no Diana, no apology texts, no social media jabs, just peace. Around midnight, Helen stepped barefoot onto the porch, tea in hand, and watched the lanterns sway one final time before unplugging them. She sat on the porch swing. The night was warm, the sky black velvet. She looked out over the yard, tidy, real, hers. She whispered to no one in particular, "You should have just asked me to share it." Then she took a long sip of tea. The kind of sip you take when there's nothing left to prove, only things to enjoy. She glanced at the plaque one last time, not in pride, but in promise. The porch light flicked on, and stayed on,